Hello, everybody. My name is Mark Chupka. I'm the Vice President for Research and Programs here at the Energy Storage Association. Thank you for attending today's webinar on the post-election energy storage outlook for federal and state policy. This webinar is being recorded. We'll send the slides and recording to all registrants within a couple of business days. Questions can be submitted at any time throughout the webinar via the questions chat box in your browser, and we'll get to those after our speakers finish their presentation. In the text of your question, please indicate to whom you would like your question addressed. All meetings and teleconferences of the Energy Storage Association are held in accordance with our antitrust guidelines. We ask that you abide by these guidelines during today's webinar. The full guidelines are available in the members portal of the ESA website. If you are not yet an ESA member and would like more information, you can reach out to my colleague, Brenda Lovell. Membership includes free access to all of our webinars, including many of those that are exclusively for members, among numerous other benefits. So please contact Brenda for more information. Before we begin, I would like to announce a couple of upcoming ESA events. ESA will host an in-depth seminar on planning on energy storage on December 2nd and 3rd. Please check our website for additional information. And save the date, February 3rd and 4th, for the ESA Energy Storage Policy Forum. Today's speakers come from a variety of backgrounds. A few of you may have heard that a couple of weeks ago we had an election, and although energy storage was not on the ballot, there were a number of important issues that are certainly affected by the outcomes of the elections that are important to energy storage interests. We have a terrific panel for you this afternoon. We're going to start with Jason Burwen, who's the Vice President for Policy at ESA. And then we'll be hearing from Katherine Hamilton, who is the chair of 38 North Solutions. She'll be talking about some of the federal policy perspectives. And then J.R. Tolbert, Managing Director for Advanced Energy Economy, who will be talking a little bit about the states. We're going to hear from Jason and then Katherine, and then have a brief Q&A session. Because Katherine's insights are so valued in this town, she's going to have to step out a few minutes early. Then we'll have JR do his presentation, and we'll have some Q&A then too. So you can ask questions via the question chat box at any time, and we'll read those out for the presenters when we get to the Q&A sessions. Now I'll turn it over to Jason.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on the post-election outlook and the energy storage industry. As the Vice President of Policy at ESA, it's oftentimes falls to me to try and figure out what we need to do in terms of promoting the market development of energy storage, to look at the policy landscape and to put those pieces together and try to come up with the strategies that will be effective. So I'm really eager to hear from our speakers today, Katherine and JR, because of the extraordinary insight and depth of experience they have in understanding the dynamics that are going to come out of the recently concluded elections. But before I jump into that, I just wanted to give folks, particularly those of you who are ESA members on the call, just a little bit of sense of where we're steering in 2021 at a very high level. Next slide, please. So at the federal level, certainly we are going to continue working on enhancing the certainty of financing energy storage projects. Obviously, a lot of that work is, and if it is not addressed in the lame duck, will continue to be tax credit eligibility for energy storage on a level playing field with other resources, but also tariffs and other matters that affect the certainty that you all have in your projects. Secondarily, directing funds towards storage deployment and manufacturing. And on this note, in particular, we'll be eager to hear from Katherine about how she sees federal procurement in particular playing a role in the Biden administration. Certainly we at ESA have some particularly interesting ideas to put forward to help drive storage in federal procurement, including the concept of making sure that any clean energy standards are involve an amount of time matching of energy demand with clean energy supply. And then third, just continuing to increase the public investment in storage innovation and orient that towards real demonstrations. The next slide gives us folks a sense of where we are in terms of wholesale markets activity in the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And really, I think that with a turnover, we'll be interested to hear from Katherine as well on what she sees the FERC doing in 2021. Certainly the things that are at the top of our list are about really clarifying how storage in hybrid configurations, that is storage plus generation, will be able to participate in markets and interconnect, really capitalizing on our wins with PJM on capacity accreditation to really make sure that across the markets, storage is being accurately assessed for its contribution to resource adequacy, better enabling storage's transmission, and certainly taking on the now sort of increasingly important questions on how we deal with bid mitigation in those markets. And then at the state level, on the next slide, just to give, again, folks a sense of where we're spending our time and focus, this gives, I hope, a sense of places that we would like to spend our time trying to work on a number of these objectives. Storage targets, of course, amongst the top, but also making sure that there are ways to value and compensate storage through, for example, the kinds of programs that have been effective in doing so, making sure that it's allowed to compete by being included in resource planning and appropriately modeled there, as well as in distribution planning, and ultimately making sure that we are able to access the grid, but not just through interconnection, but also making sure that local communities really benefit from seeing storage show up in their states. And I will be very keen to hear from JR, particularly on a number of the states that we hope to drive forward in 2021 on the outlook there. So that was my short presentation, but the more exciting discussion, I think, is going to come from our next speakers. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to turn the microphone over to Katherine Hamilton. Katherine.
Thank you so much, Jason. Now, I hope I'm able to navigate these slides. This is like the trickiest thing I've done all day. But thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me. ESA is near and dear to our hearts at 30th North Solutions. As you are well aware, my managing partner, Isaac Brown, does a lot of the legislative work for ESA, and in concert with Dave Hoppy, who is like our Republican whisperer and another principal in our firm. So we're really excited to be working with ESA and really happy to be here presenting. And I don't know how I advance the slide, so maybe someone could just do that for me. Oh, there we go. All right, presidential results. This is already outdated. I'm sorry. So the popular votes now stand at 79,370,730 for Joe Biden and 73,526,088 for Trump. That's probably changed in the last 10 minutes. The Electoral College, as some are calling 306 to 232, but that includes Georgia. So AP is not giving him Georgia yet. But in any case, Joe Biden's going to be the next president. It does not appear that the Trump administration would be able to overcome the lead that Joe Biden has in so many states right now. And what that means is that there has been now a referendum on what the Biden-Harris campaign pushed for and wanted to do that I think they're going to try to get done regardless of what is happening in Congress. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right, in the US Senate right now, it stands at 50 Republicans, 46 Democrats, and 2 independents that vote with the Democrats. Georgia has 2 runoff races that will occur on January 5th. We are operating under the assumption that the Democrats will not win both of those runoffs and that the Republicans will still retain control over the Senate with Mitch McConnell as the majority leader. that could change, but right now that's how we're operating. Next slide. Oops. Okay, this is also already outdated because seats are being called day by day, so that's now 220 Democrats to 204 Republicans, and so it's the remaining 11 seats have still not been called. A lot of these races were quite close, and it's not even just that they're close, but that there are a lot of mail-in and absentee ballots that were cast, so those have to be accounted for, and so that's why they're waiting till all of those votes have been counted, which of course is very important. Next slide, please. Maybe there we go. Opportunities, all right. So these are opportunities that I would see with Congress specifically, and that's the remaining portion of this year and going into 2021. So we are now in what's called the lame duck session, which is, post-presidential election until the end of the year. And there is usually an attempt to clear the decks and get everything kind of ship shape before the new year, especially since this Congress will be ending and there will be a new Congress sworn in January. This Congress has some things they would like to get done, one of which is to continue to fund the federal government and keep it open. Government funding runs out on December 11th, so they're right now negotiating an omnibus that would carry it to the end of the year. Potentially, there could be a continuing resolution to March, at which point they would need to do another big appropriations bill, but I think they're trying their best to get it done. This will be the last vehicle, and this is the vehicle on which also the Murkowski Mansion energy bill would like to be attached. Poor Chairman Murkowski has been working for a really long time to get this bill over the finish line. She has yet been given floor time to do it. It has a lot of really good provisions for energy storage in it, which have been passed by the House. It would just, because she's rolling off as chair of Energy and Natural Resources Committee, it would be great for her to get that done and as her legacy. But that sort of remains to be seen. It's a little bit of a long shot, but I'm hopeful for her sake. This annual appropriations bill is part of what they would be considered in this omnibus in the lame duck to fund the U.S. government and the Department of Energy. And in the House version of the bill, there were $2 billion of supplemental funding that included a great deal of extra funding for storage above and beyond the storage program at DOE. So we are hopeful that in the Senate, some of that will remain in place so that DOE has more to play with on energy storage. In 2021, there is potential for an infrastructure bill. There is not potential for a big climate bill, as certainly Vice President Biden has really pushed for this $2 trillion climate initiative. Instead, there would, because the House could do it, but the Senate probably would not if it's being run by Mitch McConnell. But there is potential to do infrastructure because the Senate does have to do something on economic recovery, and infrastructure is a really good way to do that. And I would argue that energy storage is infrastructure. There will certainly be an administration focus on climate solutions, economic growth, and U.S. manufacturing that would then be pushed for in the Congress. And from everything that we work on, and everybody in our firm works in a very bipartisan manner, and certainly has found that energy storage has enjoyed a lot of bipartisan support. There just aren't very many haters out there for energy storage. And so knowing that there's a very high level of interest on both sides of the aisle for economic recovery, for innovation, and energy storage certainly would fall into that, and manufacturing, also energy storage falls into that. So we think there could be something done. The House may be pushing forward on climate, and I would look to the Select Committee Action Plan report that came out in the spring or in the summer, look to that as sort of the game plan for what the House could do, but the Senate will not be doing that. Instead, they'll be looking at, how do we resuscitate the economy? It will, unfortunately, because of COVID, only continue to get worse. And as we're shutting down more and more things in our economy right now to try to protect people's health, I think that will continue to be the case. And so there will be a need, certainly early in 2021. So let me try to get to the next slide. So what can a Biden administration do? So the interesting thing to me in the Biden-Harris campaign was this real systems approach to all of these interconnected priorities. And those were COVID, healthcare, the economy, racial justice, and climate change, the climate crisis. And all of those were wrapped into everything they talked about. And I would see in a Biden administration that all of those are going to be wrapped into everything that they do, and everything that every single agency is charged to do will be seen through the lens of those 4 key priorities. And so if you look at that, and every single administration being pointed to do within their missions what they can, and I would say for especially on economic recovery, on environmental justice and climate crisis, energy storage is going to play an enormous role. So you look at Department of Defense as having an enormous purchase power. You look at Department of State and all of the diplomacy and leadership we'll do on climate negotiations globally. That provides an opportunity also for companies in the US to be able to work much more globally and have that be much more open to discussion rather than sort of the isolationist policy that we've had recently. Department of Agriculture, Labor, HUD, Transportation, all of these departments are going to be pointed to doing all of these 4 priorities, and I would put energy storage squarely into those. Now, if you look at Department of Energy and General Services Administration, and Jason mentioned this before, you could see procurement, and DoD falls into this too. So federal procurement, RFPs that include energy storage, PPAs that include energy storage, requiring energy storage to be included as a non-wires alternative, or any sort of build out by the federal government, whether it's in their buildings or on their public lands, that storage should be part of that. So I think that would, directionally, all of the agencies are going to be pointing in those directions that meet those goals. And I think energy storage certainly fits into that very well. So you could see those implemented through executive orders. So undoing some of what the current president has done, but also saying, all right, we're going to actually use all of our energy savings performance contracting authority to make sure that we include energy storage and other clean technologies, as an example. He has said he's going to use science as a baseline, which should be good news for everybody. And hopefully that means some of those reports that have been suppressed, that really good analyses on grid interoperability and the ability to get to 100% clean grid will be released, and that will be helpful to this community. And then the Department of Energy program priorities will certainly be enhanced. I mean, the Energy Storage Grand Challenge has been a really great program. It has been underfunded, so I think that will have an opportunity to get a lot more funding. FERC, my personal favorite agency, will right now has 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat. The administration will have the opportunity to have 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans. Of note, Allison Clements, the Democratic nominee, and Mark Christie, the Republican nominee, which were both Trump nominees, were just passed today by the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. There may not be enough floor time to actually have them become FERC commissioners in the Senate. There's just not that many days left, so I'm not sure if they'll actually get through or not, but they were passed out of committee on a bipartisan votes. And then on FERC, you could see a Commissioner Glick being promoted to chair, or the president may choose to have another chair of FERC, but that will certainly be a priority. And given orders 841 and 820, order 2222, which really helps the customer sided and distribution side of energy storage, I think you've had really good progress at FERC, so it has not been as politicized on energy storage. I think that will continue to be the case, and yet you may then have have things seen with more of a climate lens, which will also be helpful to the industry. And then on negotiations with Congress, Vice President Biden has really good relationships on both sides of the aisle. He's worked with a lot of these senators forever, really. He's been a public servant for decades and has decades-long relationships. That doesn't mean it's going to be rainbows and unicorns, because Majority Leader McConnell is certainly not in the mood to give anything right now. They are kind of waiting, keeping their base going until the Georgia runoffs are complete. But I can't see him just giving a blank check to an incoming Democratic president. But I do think that President Biden will be able to work with Republicans to get things done. So I can see that being, having a productive relationship. Okay. So the timeline as we see it is, right now the transition planning is occurring and has been going on for months. You may have seen reports of having to have Zoom calls, which everybody has anyway, to plan for the transition. The lame duck session is started, and December 11th is kind of the deadline to get appropriations done unless they do a continuing resolution. The first full week in January, the new Congress will be sworn in, and then noon on January the 20th, the new president will be sworn in, and then right away they'll be looking at what is the budget going to look like for next year for the 2022 budget. And so, immediately they're going to be working on that. In February, he'll probably release it, but they will have been in constant discussions. So it will be important for ESA as an organization to be involved both in the transition planning and in the first 100 days, so that when things get really teed off in the new administration, ESA is in really good stead and a strong position. So thank you very much for giving me some time. I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you so much, Katherine. That was really great. And I'm going to take the prerogative as the moderator here to ask some questions while folks obviously submit theirs. I've already seen a few come in. So federal procurement, which you mentioned, certainly I think that's something that many folks have pointed at being what a Biden administration might accomplish if it does not have traction with Congress to get some things done. And so my question to you is twofold. The first is, as we think about the role that could play for storage, and certainly one thing that ESA has been talking about, again, is ensuring that, say, any federal procurement of clean energy includes some requirement to also match that clean energy delivery to some extent with the actual facility demand. What lessons do you think we should take from the executive orders that the Obama administration undertook on clean energy procurement that would be helpful for folks to both manage their expectations, but also understand what might be coming down the pike?
Yeah, those are great questions, Jason. I would say we're not just going to be picking up where the Obama administration left off. A lot has happened since then, and Biden has a much stronger mandate. Remember, President Obama did not run on climate at all. It was just not part of the conversation. I mean, Waxman-Markey occurred early in his first term, but that did not pass in the Senate, and no climate legislation was passed, other than the stimulus, which actually did get a lot done and drove down prices for a lot of our technologies. But I think you're going to see a much stronger, bolder plan from Biden. So I think you're going to see directionally that agencies will really be tasked to make sure that, for example, the social cost of carbon is actually high enough to make sense when you're looking at everything you do from procurement, so that that's built in and is part of the metrics. I think you could see something where non-Wales alternatives are considered in any build out on federal land, so that you make sure that you're building the most efficient systems, which would include energy storage, as you look to build out renewables as well. I think flexibility is going to, and resilience are going to be really key attributes that energy storage has that can be woven into all of these and the decisions that the Biden administration makes. So I could see all of those, whether it's the social cost of carbon or flexibility or non-Wales alternatives, really all being part of the procurement policy that the Biden administration would put into place. But he could certainly do an executive order to ask the agencies to do anything, and then they would have, I imagine, cross-cutting, agency task forces that would work together, would learn together and support each other based on what their missions are.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of different directions you could very much take this. A related question drawing on one of the commenter questions coming in, which also could pertain to federal procurement as well as, for example, for that matter, things like tax credits. Where do you see Buy America provisions or labor standards or those kinds of interests figuring into what an administration or what legislation might be coming that might boost storage?
Yeah, so the administration can do that for any of their purchases. Congress, if they do some sort of a stimulus that would include infrastructure and manufacturing, they could include, fair labor provisions by America in those. That was certainly part of the stimulus bill. I think it's going to be a negotiation, certainly in the Senate, on those provisions, though, to make sure, if those are going to be put into place. But I certainly think the Senate will be open to doing at least Buy American provision. So I could see that happening. But I think that the administration would need to work with Congress to have some of that policy put into place. You can do some in the Department of Labor, don't get me wrong, on workforce. So the Trump administration has done that, and I'm sure that the Biden administration could do the same, do some workforce issues in Department of Labor. But if you want to pass a big funding bill with some of those provisions, you would really need to work with Congress on it.
Got it. Sort of switching gears a little bit into sort of the discussion of infrastructure and your sense that there may be room here for a deal on infrastructure, perhaps as part of sort of a COVID economic rescue package. I think a couple questions there. The first is, do you see any specific opportunities or threats from framing infrastructure as part of COVID rescue, as least again as pertains to the prospects of storage, versus say a different kind of approach to infrastructure? And then secondarily, we're going to have razor thin margins in Congress regardless of party control. Is that a recipe for actually bipartisanship, in your opinion, or do you think that that just means a swingier gridlock?
Yeah, so yes, and yes, you could you could definitely still have a lot of gridlock, although the economy is not getting better, and I do think that infrastructure that creates jobs, and I think it will be very important for ESA to couch this as job creation and sustaining jobs. That will be really, really important, because I think that will help make the case for an economic recovery. And it's all just so closely tied together. It doesn't mean the ESA is going to be talking about those jobs that people are losing right now in restaurants, but there are a lot of jobs that people are losing elsewhere that need to be either brought back or created. And I think that being able to couch everything in those terms is going to be really important. And then on the issue of getting something done, I mean, we've got a new Congress coming in. You have a lot of new members. Progressives did really well in the House, and I think all of them want to get things done. You've got a lot of young members, and some of them are moderates too, but you have a lot of young members that want to take home something to show that they've done something. They feel like they have a climate mandate, and so they're going to be working really hard in the House, certainly, to get some things done. And they may be working across the aisle. The Senate, they would have to do that to get something done on climate. So I do think there's going to be some negotiation, but I'm always hopeful that we can get something done.
Indeed, you must be hopeful in this in this business in order to get things done. It would be, and obviously a couple questions coming through from folks on the webinar, and it would probably be malpractice for me not to ask you about the prospects for storage ITC or ITC extension, particularly if we are going to have a Republican Senate. What do you see is the prospects there, and what are things that the storage industry should be taking into account in light of what you see?
Yeah, so, and Isaac is like the absolute ninja on this one. But I think that on the tax front, certainly the investment tax credit has been kind of the go-to, and the production tax credit have been the go-tos for the renewables industries. And the storage industry has done a masterful job in fitting into that, and to trying to make sure that the playing field is level. I do think there are going to be some new ways to look at text constructs moving forward. And if you look at Senator Crapo, who will be the chair of Senate Finance Committee, he has this technology neutral idea, and a lot of Democrats have those ideas as well, to try to figure out how do you incentivize innovation? How do you incentivize clean energy? How do you incentivize US technology? And I think in any tax construct, energy storage is poised to be a winner, because it is innovative, it is manufacturing, it is about US technologies, and it's certainly about clean energy. So I think that ESA will need to continue to engage with all of those committees and make the arguments that work best depending on who the person is you're talking to. But you can make the arguments on a number of different fronts that energy storage is a win-win-win technology, and I think it will do well whether or not it is an ITC construct or something more technology neutral.
All right, I'm going to do a couple of more rapid fire questions also, to hopefully cover the large landscape we have here. Really quickly on energy bills, if the BEST Act isn't going to move forward as part of energy bills, we're going to see either we're going to see Senator Manchin and a Senator Barrasso, or potentially Lee, on energy and natural resources. What do you think of the prospects for something like the BEST Act or a large energy innovation bill with that changed committee?
Well, so Barrasso is very different than Murkowski, certainly, and Murkowski and Manchin have had a really nice, strong reputation. They've had a strong relationship. I'm not sure what Barrasso and Manchin's relationship is. I think the committee itself is strong. It has people who understand energy really well, come from a lot of Western states, but certainly a lot on the Democratic side are very sophisticated on energy resources and understand energy storage. I think rather than thinking about, are we going to have a big bill on energy, we may instead have some conversations on, how do we push U.S. manufacturing forward in innovation, energy innovation forward? And that was kind of the question, is like, do we have an innovation bill? And I think that is definitely still a possibility. I think energy storage would be one of the technologies that would definitely be considered in something like that, though.
Got it. Real quick, moving to FERC, our favorite place. Dynamics going forward. First of all, anything we should be, is there any, question from a commenter, is there any concern about what can happen now until the chairmanship is moved with the change in chairmanship to Danley over these next 3 FERC meetings? And given if Allison Clements and Mark Christie's nominations do not move, what do you see for the dynamics for FERC in 2021, and will they ever get a full complement?
Ooh, I hope they get a full complement. It's really important. We always need a full FERC. I think it's really, really important. So a couple of things. There's not much time left in the year, so I don't think there's going to be much done major. Remember, there are only 3 commissioners now. Commissioner Chatterjee has been such a leader on energy storage that I can't see any damage being done to energy storage at all. He has a strong legacy on it, and certainly Chairman Danley was not supportive of some of those recent decisions, but he won't be able to reverse those. So I can't see anything major happening at FERC. Going into 2021. The Trump administration was quite slow at getting people through. They were nominated and then pulled back, and nominated and pulled back. I'm hoping that the Biden administration, I'm quite certain that the transition team is working on vetting folks right now, gauging interest to make sure that they have somebody. And remember, they work very closely with the majority minority leaders to make sure that they have support. So I'm very hopeful that they have a full complement. I think one thing that's very important to have, and Mark Christie would bring to FERC, is state perspective. So making sure that you have somebody who has had some experience on the state level to really understand the issues of jurisdiction. I just think that brings for richer decisions at FERC.
Great. All right. Last one, real fast. Trade, haven't talked about it much, but what do you see ahead in a Biden administration? Particularly, what would you suggest might be ahead for folks who, for example, are right now facing Section 301 tariffs on lithium-ion batteries?
Yeah, I am not a trade expert. I don't, but I don't think that the issue of China is going to go away. I just think that it will be to a different level, a different degree. So I think there will be more room to negotiate with the Trade Commission. I think there will be more folks who will be reasonable at listening to how important global trade is and how important it is to the industry to make sure that we have a supply chain that's strong. So I think there will be, less of an anti-clean energy thrust, certainly, and that has had a lot to do with some of the decisions that were made. I don't think that some of the trade issues with China will necessarily go away, but I do think that the tone will be different.
Got it. Well, Katherine Hamilton, thank you so much for joining us. I know you said you have to jump a little early, but we really appreciate you taking the time to discuss your look ahead and your crystal ball with many of the ESA membership and others on this webinar.
Well, thank you so much, Jason. I feel like it's a little bit muddy, the crystal ball, but it's the best I can do. And thank you so much for inviting me. It was really great. You guys are a great organization.
Hey, thank you. We really appreciate it. And now it gives me great pleasure to turn the microphone over to J.R. Tolbert. J.R., take us away.
Thanks, Jason. It is a pleasure to be able to join the folks at ESA today to talk a little bit about the outcomes of the 2020 election at the state level. So always love joining you all and the opportunity to talk a little bit about the politics of clean energy. So the 2020 elections, really quickly, what were we watching at AEE? We were primarily looking to see if the 2018 gubernatorial blue wave would extend to legislatures, specifically in states where governors had taken action to move forward clean energy and climate policy via executive order. States like Michigan and Wisconsin, sort of chief among those. That feeds into the next piece, which was the politics of 100% clean energy and whether or not we would see new pickups. Then also we were looking at the politics of regulatory commissions. So a lot was made early in this year about the ACC, where Democrats for a good portion of the year looked as though they were poised to pick up a 3-2 majority on the commission. And unfortunately, they fell short, but fortunately, it seems like Arizona is going to continue to move forward. And then the other question was the question of would a ballot measure in New Mexico that would move the New Mexico PRC from an elected body to an appointed body by the governor actually pass? We are very excited that it did pass, as many of the fears of folks on the ground in New Mexico have been that they would have a hard time achieving their 100% clean energy mandates because of sort of the politics that were at play at the PRC. Voters decided to empower whomever is the next governor, whether that's Governor Lujan Grisham winning re-election or somebody else, decided to empower that next governor to have the ability to appoint commissioners. So I'm going to quickly jump through a number of states that we were paying attention to and sort of what we see coming down the pike. But before I do that, I wanted to give folks, the broad takeaway. Prior to Election Day in 2020, prior to November the 3rd, there were 48 states that had split control of their legislature. One state that has a unicameral legislature in Nebraska, and one state that Republicans controlled one chamber and Democrats controlled the other chamber. That state was Minnesota. where Republicans controlled the Senate and Democrats controlled the House. Today, there are 48 states where either Republicans or Democrats control the entire chamber, one state with a unicameral legislature, and still one state where there is split control of the legislature, and that is in Minnesota. What we see, the one place that we saw a shift was in New Hampshire. And there's some question about what happens as well in Alaska, as Alaska Republicans increase their majority in the legislature there, but you had a split governing coalition in the House, but it looks like Republicans sort of fully will have control of that legislature moving forward. So, on a top line, it looks as though there wasn't a ton that changed in the 2020 election cycle. That being said, we still see lots of opportunity for progress at the state level. Again, in Arizona, Republicans retained control of the Arizona Corporation Commission with a 3-2 majority. The current commission, though, passed 100% carbon-free energy last week. But there are a ton of details that will need to be worked out there. Energy storage is going to have a huge role to play in Arizona as that state moves forward towards achieving those goals, both in the interim targets of 2032 and 2040, as well as at the end of 2050. The new or the incoming chair of the commission, Commissioner Olson, has been one of the leading voices in the state around questions of increasing competition and whether or not they should look at potentially restructuring APS in state. So I am sure that will be a topic of conversation in 2021. My hope is that regardless of where they end up there, that Commissioner Olson and others will push for more competition in the process by which the utility procures its energy needs to be able to achieve the goals set forth by the commission just last week. Another state that we are certainly watching is Illinois. This is a state where, a lot of folks thought that we might see action before the end of the year on comprehensive energy legislation that included quite a bit around storage. The fact of the matter is that, Democrats, while they held the majority, both Speaker Madigan and Governor Pritzker have taken a little bit of a hit in their influence and power within the legislature. Governor Pritzker is weakened because of the defeat of his fair tax measure, which had been sort of his focus for this election cycle. And Speaker Madigan, who is the longest serving Speaker of the House, I believe in US history, but certainly a current Speaker of the House, has, for the first time in a long time, had people within his caucus say that he should no longer be the Speaker. As a result of that and COVID, they canceled veto session, which is where folks thought most things would happen, therefore bouncing the comprehensive debate to the next legislative session. As we look at that, there will continue to be a tremendous amount of opportunity to craft that piece of legislation. There are 3 different bills that the governor's office seems to be pulling from in determining what the pathway is there, but that's going to be a major sort of focus of opportunity in the direction that goes. The next state on our list was a state that a lot of folks had turned attention to, primarily, I think, because of the work that Governor Whitmer had done to move clean energy forward via an executive order just in the month leading up to the election, was Michigan. It was a state where Democrats needed to pick up 6 seats in order to take a razor-thin majority in the House. But for the second consecutive presidential year, Republicans and Democrats walked out of election night with the exact same split that they walked into the election with. So Republicans will retain control of the state legislature there. That said, there continues to be some opportunity at the PSC. 2021 we'll see IRP filings, and 2021 is the last year of the existing energy efficiency resource standard and renewable portfolio standard, and frankly will be a different, presents a different opportunity because of the different way that utilities will be regulated and having a very strong commission. We continue to see opportunity there, not opportunity from the legislature, but in the regulatory side. Minnesota again was a state where folks thought there might be an opportunity for Democrats to pick up the Senate, and if Democrats did pick up the Senate, an opportunity to actually codify Governor Walz's executive order on 100% clean energy in much the same way that Virginia codified Governor Northam's just this year. The fact of the matter is that did not happen. Which really sort of leads to an interesting dynamic. I was on a call earlier today where people were like, well, maybe you can get a couple of Republicans to join the Democrats now, and that things have sort of shaken out on a proposal that might not be quite as bold as 100%. The other side to that is that Senate Republicans in Minnesota last year introduced a piece of legislation to move forward on clean energy, and my sense is that leadership in the House and leadership in the Senate, there is a pathway for the two of them to get together to come up with something that is more incremental, so not 100% clean, but is more incremental. So that's something that we'll be watching, and we think that there could be some real opportunity there for really the host of clean energy technologies, with storage being a major piece of that. The next state is Nevada. Nevada is a state that, I feel like in the 2017 legislative session passed a suite, I think it was 9 different clean energy bills that Governor Sandoval signed into law. In 2019, they passed their RPS. In 2018, an RPS had actually passed on the ballot. They went ahead and codified that in 2019. On election night, clean energy did really well. So as a function of having had the RPS on the ballot in 2018, it remained on the ballot in 2020. It passed with more than 60% of the vote. I believe it ended up with like 64% of the vote. That number could be wrong, but it was definitely north of 60%. Meanwhile, Democrats lost ground in the legislature, but were able to maintain their majority. What we tend to think that means is that leadership is probably going to be a little hesitant to move aggressively on virtually anything, and that clean energy and climate policy very well may be a casualty of that as it relates to the legislature. But there will be some opportunities there that'll come into focus in the weeks ahead. But that will elevate the PUC's importance, which has opened a process by which it is exploring pathways to 100% clean energy. And we think that there will be numerous opportunities at the PUC to elevate storage, in addition to some opportunities that might arise during the legislative session that's upcoming. Next state is Texas. This is another state that many people thought might trend blue, and that in the state legislature, if that happened, it would have been the state house that would have become under Democratic control. What ends up happening is that Republicans maintain all control of all branches of government there. And this is going to be a tough year in Texas. A tight budget year. Texas is one of the few states that doesn't have a state income tax. So, they have been feeling the impacts of COVID in their budget in a very real way, which means that there are a lot of different programs that'll likely be on the chopping block. Now, that said, the chair of there was an energy storage bill that was introduced and died because they ran out of time in 2019. It died on the floor of the House, I believe, in 2019 because they simply weren't able to get to all of the legislation and it wasn't a high enough priority. That bill has an opportunity to move forward again this year. The chair of the relevant committee in the Senate has indicated an interest in carrying that bill forward, and some chance that it could be a broader bill around distributed energy resources. But we do see some opportunity to move that. That said, given the tight budget, it could be very difficult to get through the process again. The final state that I'll watch or I would put out there as a state to watch in 2021 is Virginia. So there was no 2020 election. We are a off year election cycle in Virginia. We'll have our gubernatorial and House of Delegates elections next year. But with Commissioner Mark Christie being up for a FERC seat, if that goes through and he is appointed, that means that there's an opportunity for there to be a clean energy majority at the SEC. Which could have a tremendous impact, I think, for folks who have been following what's going on in Virginia. We are not very thrilled with the proposed rules from the commission staff on third-party solar. We feel as though they cut and pasted directly from the utilities what the utilities would like third parties to have to do, which just creates more obstacles to companies being able to get their storage projects into the mix and onto the grid. So we think that if that flips, there might be an opportunity to be able to have the commission actually put rules that incentivize third parties and incentivize that competition so that we can get the benefit of reduced costs that your companies would bring to everybody. At the same time, we expect that the legislature will push, some members of the legislature will push for a permit by rule for storage projects. So currently, both onshore wind and solar projects under 150 megawatts in the Commonwealth qualify for permit by rule, at which if they go through that process, the SEC has less ability to deny the project, so to speak. And an opportunity to have energy storage included in that process as a process to help facilitate getting projects on as quickly as possible. Now, the challenge there is that it's only a 45-day session in Virginia. Virginia is expected to have a tight budget year where issues involving marijuana legalization and dealing with potential budget shortfalls will dominate the conversation, and Republicans are already saying they're going to reject the traditional 45-day session in favor of what the Virginia Constitution says, which only requires a 30% or a 30-day session. So it could be very tight there as well. So with that, I will wrap up. It was a lot of states to cover in a short amount of time, but I'll wrap up and throw it back to Jason.
Great. Thank you, JR. And yeah, the question box is open again. I encourage folks who are attending, type your questions in. We might go a little bit over 3 o'clock if there's a lot of questions coming in, but I'll take the first couple, which is, JR, given the macroeconomic situation that a lot of states are going to find themselves in post-COVID, what appetite do you see in state legislatures really to do ambitious work on clean energy, including storage, particularly anything that costs money? We mentioned like how Illinois might be, for example, putting together some legislation. I'd just be curious your sort of overview thoughts on that, having tracked a lot of the different legislatures.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think that things that have a direct outlay from the state are going to be very difficult, that if they're new programs. Anybody who worked in or around state legislatures in 2009 and 2010 will recall that in most states, it was sort of across the board cuts in order to deal with the economic recession that we were going through. And there is some chance that that ends up being the case again here. I think the thing that makes Illinois both a challenge and an opportunity is that, you know, its status quo is that the state actually sets the amount of money that can be allocated to the RPS, which in theory is where energy storage programs might live in one version of the legislative package. The opportunity, though, is that, you know, all of the packages, or two of the three packages, and the governor's thought proposed different vehicles for generating money. So both the labor proposal and the environmental group's proposal has an FRR program that I know a lot of folks within the industry, including AEE, have issue with. And the governor's program has a carbon tax. So there are opportunities for new funding streams that could come up in a state like Illinois. But I think across the board, you know, that's why I think so much of the focus will be on implementation of what's already out there, because there's not going to be a big appetite for a lot of new expenditures.
Got it. Yeah, no, I think that certainly that's something we are thinking about at ESA is what are the ways, and for example, updating regulations, which may be costless as it were, could be a much more productive pathway for a lot of our policy engagement in the 2021 sessions. That said, which states do you think are going to go big in a legislative way next that folks in our industry should be watching, Illinois obviously being one of them?
Yeah, you know, I think the list of places in my mind are Illinois, obviously, first and foremost in my mind. The you know, Colorado, I continue to hear rumblings from different folks within the legislature there around opportunity. But frankly, with energy storage, and Katherine alluded to this earlier, is such a it's something that has, you know, pretty broad bipartisan support, that I think there is opportunity really all across the board to be able to take advantage of storage and to be able to run those to advance policies that can move it. But you know, and I guess you could go way down a list and look at that. But you know, I think if I were to pick two places, I would think Illinois, I would think Colorado, and frankly, like there continues to be interest in what the sort of next steps are in a state like Nevada, and that could present opportunities as well. But again, it's one of those where it has such broad bipartisan support in virtually every state that I go to, that I tend to think that talking about energy storage bills that provide a way to be able to open the door for storage in the state will get us progress, that then as we demonstrate the value, we have tremendous opportunity to be able to get much larger things done. It's so I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, I know we're getting really close to the end here, so I might ask you a couple of just quick shots. And again, last questions go into that chat box. PUCs. Are there any PUCs? You mentioned Arizona. Certainly, we're going to be watching now that they've passed a reg that goes to a rulemaking. Other PUCs that you think folks should be keeping an eye on as well for progress on storage and clean energy matters?
Yeah, Virginia is high on my list. North Carolina is high on my list, where Governor Cooper has appointed a majority of the commission. So that's one that I think has real opportunity. You know, I think that in the bipartisanship sense, I think there's probably some opportunity in a state like Georgia as well, around storage, in particular storage that is, you know, behind the meter storage, some opportunity there. Nevada, where they are looking at 100% and trying to map out how we get there. I think there's probably some opportunity to push within IRPs out there as well. And then, I think basically, states where we see utilities that have made commitments to 100%. Those are other states that would be on my list. So, the Minnesotas
Right.
of the world, the Indianas of the world.
So flipping from the states that are clean energy focused, there are obviously going to be a large number of states that, clean energy is not the organizing public policy principle, maybe less interested in energy storage from that standpoint. What do you see are the prospects for example, advancing energy storage through a grid security and resilience discussion, and especially in states that are not interested in having the clean energy conversation right now?
Yeah, so Indiana is a sort of great example of this in my mind. So if folks don't know, Indiana has gone through this process where they had a legislation in 2019 that created a 21st Century Energy Task Force. The task force is set to put forward its policy recommendations on Thursday of this week, so tomorrow. Having scanned the report is all about grid resilience and grid reliability. And the integration of storage as a way to add resiliency to the grid and a way to increase the reliability of renewable energy positions it to be a major piece of the puzzle in a state like Indiana. And I think that holds firm in places like Ohio that are not focused on clean energy at all, particularly if Chair Randazzo is asked to leave, given his scandal right now, but also, just a host of other states, Florida, and others that are looking at ways to make their grid more resilient. Texas again comes up in this light as well as a real opportunity for us.
Well, JR, it's exciting to hear you talking about all the opportunities that are out there, because certainly we at ESA are very eager to chase all the ones that are going to be available for the storage industry, particularly given, as you note, the wide and bipartisan support that storage technologies have. As it is, though, we are at the end of our webinar. So thank you, JR, for taking the time to share your insights and look ahead with us. And I'll turn it back over to you, Mark, to close us out.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, Jason. And I'd just like to remind people that there are some upcoming events, December 2nd and 3rd, 2020. We have a seminar on planning, analyzing, procuring, and communicating about storage. And save the date for February 3rd and 4th, 2021. It's our Energy Storage Policy Forum. So have a good day, rest of the day, everybody. Stay safe, and we'll see you the next time. Bye-bye.